Daniel Walsh of the Business Council is our guest this morning on Capital News Conference.
WRGB, the area's #1 news station, presents Capital News Conference. People and issues for today. Now, your host for Capital News Conference, Bill Duffy.
Good morning. Our guest this morning a year ago was one of the most powerful men in the Assembly, the Majority Leader, the #2 man in that body. He has since switched jobs and gone into the private sector. He is Daniel Walsh of the Business Council, one of the most powerful lobby voices in Albany. Also joining us this morning is Professor Alan Chartock, who has been watching these lobbyists and much more for many years. We'll be back with the questions and the answers right after this. Professor Chartock, who's been known to unmask lobbyists, if not beat them up, has the first question.
Now, Dan, although you are working for the Business Council, they have set up a separate intellectual enterprise for you. Could you just briefly tell us what that is and why we have this instead of just going right to work for the Business Council?
Well, actually, I'm the president of the Public Policy Institute, which is not a new organization. It's an affiliate of the New York State Business Council. It's the research education arm that was established about 4 to 5 years ago as an affiliate of the Business Council. It has its own separate board of trustees. It has its own bylaws. It's not a lobbying arm. There's a prohibition in the bylaws that speak to that. So I'm not really part of the lobbying arm of the Business Council. I'm in the so-called think tank part of it.
Okay, we'll get back to that, but let me ask you something. First of all, is there life after the legislature? And everybody wants to know, did you leave because you couldn't be Speaker, because no Democrat from upstate New York was ever going to be made Speaker?
No, not at all, Alan. I had a very, very good opportunity, and there was a time in my career where I really had to think twice about staying. And as you well know, Speaker Miller reappointed me in January to continue as Majority Leader. And
the #2 man.
Right, and I had the opportunity in April 10th, actually, when I was approached by Ray Schuler, President of the Business Council, to consider the possibility of leaving and going with the Public Policy Institute. April 26th I left, and May 4th I started with the Business Council.
Now there's a big rumor around town, and that big rumor is that Ray Schuler, who is a wealthy man, as well as a brilliant one, will retire, and then you will move up after having been the head of the Public Policy Institute to run the entire Business Council. But the reason you haven't done that is because there's a prohibition, the so-called revolving door prohibition, means that you can't go directly from the legislature into lobbying, and that's why you're where you are for the next 2 years. It's sort of a parking spot.
Well, as usual, you put two questions into one statement. I'm a candidate when and if Mr. Schuler decides to make his move. The annual meeting of the Business Council will be next month at the Sagamore. I think really any discussion right now about what Ray Schuler's longtime goals are is rather premature, because the board of directors will make that determination. But I'm not part of the lobbying operation. I am part of the Public Policy Institute, and we do have registered lobbyists who are part of the Business Council, but that's not part of the function of the Public Policy Institute.
What's going on with government? Ray Schuler was a Rockefeller appointee, a transportation commissioner, nearly became Secretary of Transportation under Jimmy Carter, leaves and goes into private industry. Stanley Fink leaves a position no one ever quit before for private life. You have a very powerful position. You quit it to go into private life. Is it the bucks?
Well, I would be less than honest with you if I didn't tell you that that was an attractive part of the enticement. But I think, I've been in public life. I'm a little different, I think, than most legislators. I did this full time. When I was elected to the New York State Assembly and took office in January '73, I gave up a teaching position that I had back in Western New York. So I literally worked at the job full time. Prior to that, I had served on a county legislature. I had been a public school teacher, so I have literally been in public life all of my working time. I had the possibility of making an adjustment, one adjustment that would get me into a private sector position, so to speak, but with a totally different day-to-day kind of a thought process. I've always said one of the deficiencies of public life is you have a tendency to be reactionary rather than to be able to act on long-term programs. I happen to be coming into Business Council at the same time that the Board of Directors have charged the Business Council with a forward agenda where we're going to be 5 years from now, because to a great extent the tax cut push that has been very effective and very successful in the '87 session is going to be abated somewhat. It's going to be very difficult to continually say that we need more tax cuts and be effective in bringing that to pass.
So if somebody came to you in the legislature and said we're going to triple your salary, that wouldn't necessarily have kept you there?
If somebody would have said in the legislature they're going to
When you
triple
were
my-
there.
Oh, I needed a change, and I think the time was appropriate, and I think the offer was also appropriate, and also the organization was very, very appropriate. And I think that's the part that enticed me more than anything else. I've been a very good viewer of the Business Council for a long time and had a high regard for not only their work product, but the people who were there, the Ray Schulers, the Eddie Reinfords, and keeping in mind also that the Business Council is unique in the country. The Board of Directors of the Business Council are required by our bylaws to be both either presidents or CEOs of their companies. So we literally have the cream of the crop of the business community in New York State. That lends a tremendous amount of prestige to the organization as a voice. And that's the thing I think that intrigued me too. As I said, it'd be less than honest with you if I didn't tell you that the compensation was better than being a member of the New York State Assembly. But
So you wouldn't have taken his job if it paid less than you were making in the legislature?
I don't know. It's hard to say. If you're talking $1 or $2 less, possibly, but I think what I have also is the prospect long range of doing some things that I probably couldn't have done if I'd have stayed 10 more years in the legislature, plus the fact that I think any public official will tell you that running for office every 2 years is a rather wearing experience. And I've gone through, including my local time, 9 different elections. Fortunately, have never lost one. And I just felt it was an appropriate time to get out.
So, Alan, there's no question that Stanley Fink left because he could make $500,000 a year as a lawyer. He
No,
did
I
it
think,
for money.
I think there's a lot of question about why Stanley Fink left. Dan would probably know a lot better than I, but from the outside, it certainly looks like his gubernatorial ambitions had been thwarted. This is a man who definitely wanted to be governor of New York State, and when Cuomo came on, it looked like he was going to be here for a long time. But let me ask Dan a question that has been plaguing me for a while, and that, Dan, is that Ray Schuler, unbeknownst to a lot of people, even though he was a Rockefeller appointee, was Democrat, and you are a Democrat. Now, everybody thinks of business as a natural ally of the Republican Party. And yet these two big shots who run the organization come right out of the Democratic ranks. Is there a reason for that?
Well, probably because your premise is wrong. And that is that not every Democrat is considered to be anti-business. And I happen to come from an area of New York State where manufacturing was the primary base of employment. I also happen to come from a family who, having spent their whole life in some type of a manufacturing operation. My dad's still alive. He's 98 years old. He'll tell you, what this country was really made of, and I had constant reminders of that at the supper table my whole life. So I knew what business meant. I knew what work was. I knew what a job meant. I knew what salaries were.
But there's a stereotype, is there not, that Republicans and business go together?
Yeah, but I think that's dispelled to a great extent. I think 7 or 8 years ago, somebody did a study on the PAC committees as to who gave who to what, or who gave what money to who, and it turned out that most of the public employee unions were giving it to the Senate Republican campaign committee, and most of the business was giving their monies to the Assembly campaign committee. So I don't think there's anything written in the stone as to what political party is more favorable to what private sector piece, but I think it flows back and forth depending on the issues in the current situation. Certainly, if you look at the legislative record of 1987, as it applies to business in New York State, you would have to say that anyone in any political party who voted yes for the very large menu of very, very plus programs would be supportive of business in New York State. And I suspect if you looked at it, and you wouldn't have to look at it under a microscope, that it crosses all political boundaries.
Well, I would disagree with you, Dan, on one thing there, and that is I think you could almost take a litmus test and come up with Program A, Program B, Program C, and one could almost talk automatically about which party was going to be for it and against it in a preliminary sense in the legislature. You could show me, for example, a lawyer bill, and I would say, well, yeah, the Assembly would probably be there, and if it was opposed to the doctors, that the Senate would probably be taking the doctors, so that there's a certain amount of predictability in the way the legislature works.
I think that's a contemporary phenomenon. It's really not something that's locked in the Constitution and bylaws of a political party. I think it just happens to be something that occurs within a block of maybe 1 or 2 sessions. That happens to be the issue. In the case of doctors, you're talking about medical malpractice. You're talking about tort law change. That doesn't necessarily flow that lawyers are locked into one position and everybody else is in the other, and maybe because there are more Democrat lawyers than there are Republican lawyers, that necessarily is a political position. I think what you had there is a sensitivity of how far you could go to take away individual rights rather than changing of the tort law. So you almost have to look at the issue specifically. I think if you're probably true, Alan, if you went back 20 years ago in New York State and tried to draw lines. But the issues are so different. You look at an average calendar in either house today and watch the bills that are passed, you're talking a variety of 25 to 30 subject areas, changes in a massive amount of laws.
Yeah, but if that's true, how come the Republicans are so consistently, as a group, opposed to campaign financing laws in New York State, and the Democrats are always pushing them? The presumption would be that the Republicans have more money being given to them, therefore they don't want to play by a new set of rules.
No, I don't think it's that. I think really what you're talking about at campaign financing is the incumbency versus the challenger, and that's basically the issue.
You mean that anybody who arrived under the old rules likes the old rules and therefore is going to stay with them?
It's like a guy who buys a house in a very attractive neighborhood and pays a considerable amount of money, and suddenly he finds out that somebody wants to put a road through the back of it that would diminish the value of his house. Or there's a large landfill to be built 10 miles down the road. Once you're in, you want to protect what you have, and you don't want to have it diminished in any way, shape, or form.
By having a whole bunch of new people wanting to run for office in this democracy.
I don't think a politician is any different than the human nature exists just there. I happen to be one who supported campaign financing from the day it came. I also happen to have supported the public payment of campaign brochures. That was a very strong piece of the League of Women Voters platform. I have no problems with that.
Some people call this the incumbency protection plan.
Well, it's the nature of the process, I think. And will there be public financing in time? I don't know. If it does, it'll probably only happen on statewide offices.
Last year, Sandy Fink proposed, the year before, cutting the corporation tax. At the same time, Warren Anderson was calling for big cuts in the personal income tax, and somebody's there having a nervous breakdown. Republicans talking about cutting taxes, Democrats talking about cutting corporation taxes. Is there an identity crisis in the legislature?
No. I think what has happened is that they have come to realize what a lot of people have been saying for a long time, and let's be honest, they're intelligent people. They're not reacting to an editorial that was written the day before. They understand what studies say, and they understand what, for example, the migration study that New York State in 80 to 85 that the Business Council or the Public Policy Institute just released last week points out that to a certain extent we've stemmed the tide a little bit of the out-migration out of New York State. And for all the reasons that the report pointed out why people were leaving, there were a lot of reasons why people were also coming in.
Why are people coming in as opposed to leaving now?
Well, first of all, we have what is perceived to be as an excellent medical delivery system. We have better than most states' infrastructure. We have better than
infrastructure. A lot of people still don't know what that means. What is infrastructure?
You define that a variety of ways. You can define it by the actual brick and mortar. You can define it beyond that into the areas of dealing with the issues like landfills, garbage, those things that are part of your day-to-day operation. As much as we say we've got problems and there are barges floating around, we are far better than most states, but we still have, because of the massive amounts of it, we have a bigger problem to deal with. But I think the political process responds to that, Bill, and I think what has happened in the last few years is that people have accepted the fact that New York State has to change. Anybody who looked at the personal income tax structure in New York State in the mid-1970s and said a 17% bracket on earned income, 13% on unearned income, and would tell you that that's where we ought to be, you know, they're in the wrong world.
All right, we have to stop. We'll pick that up when we come back right after this. So the question is, have they stopped the out-migration?
No, the out-migration has not stopped, but it's been to a great extent cut in half since the study, was last released, showing the period of 70 through 1980. And one of the conclusions you can make, I think, is that things are getting better, and the economic signals that are there are ones that people are beginning to look to.
Or things are getting worse, if I may say so, in some of the Sunbelt states, in the oil market, for example, and the agriculture, so of course some of that seems to be collapsing too.
Right, and I think the study showed some very positive patterns, and keeping in mind also that the out years of the tax cut proposal and the corporate tax proposal that was adopted this year really isn't going to take full effect until 1990. So I think to the governor's credit, to the legislators' credit, to the public opinion makers, those who have rallied around the fact that New York State had to change its manner of doing business, everybody ought to take credit for it, because I think we're on the right track. And I think the Business Council's position will be, coming out of the annual meeting in September, is to carry the theme that let's make New York State a real advantage. And let's not just look at it from the standpoint of competing with New Jersey and Connecticut. Let's make us a global center again, so that we don't have to worry about the competition among our peers, because our peers will have to compete to us. And I think the thing that came through in Westchester with our board of directors meeting about a week ago, very strongly from both the small corporations to the largest corporations internationally in the world who are on our board, that we have to prepare an agenda for the New York State government to take a look at, which will put New York State in the out years in a global position of high competition, because we can no longer sit back and say that we have to compete with New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, and that's all.
Let me ask you this, Dan. You retired from the legislature, and then there's this prohibition we mentioned earlier that you can't work for a couple of years as a lobbyist. Do you think that's a good idea?
I do. I can't quarrel with that at all. Sometimes I get a little frustrated by the fact that it appears to be a long sector of time. But
well, you have another year to go, essentially, right?
Well, it started in April of this year, so it'll run till April of '89.
How's that work? Can't you even speak to anybody in the state government?
The Public Officers Law, since I came from the legislature, establishes a prohibition on me as it applies to the legislature, not to the executive branch, not to the judicial branch, and not to the state agencies. A lot of that is so-called in the eyes of the beholder. I mean, there are some very obvious gray areas. For example, I can't walk up on the Hill and speak to a particular issue, a bill. That obviously is lobbying. Can I develop for the Business Council through the Public Policy Institute a 5-year agenda that speaks to the issues? Yes. Can I be tapped, so to speak, by Commissioner Tom Sobel, the new Commissioner of State Ed, to deal with some committees that he would maybe like me to sit on, to deal with programmatic plus budgetary issues as they apply to the State Ed Department? The answer is yes, but can I take them all the way to their completion through a budget process and through the legislature? The answer is no. And what you have is some gray areas where if there is any doubt, you just defer back. And what I have done personally, and what the Business Council and the Public Policy Institute has done, and the Board of Directors of the Business Council and the trustees of the Public Policy Institute, is to make it explicitly clear that I will not be lobbying, that my function is not to lobby. I will do whatever is within the parameters of the law, but if there is any gray area at all, I will defer back to a position of no activity, because we don't want to obviously sacrifice the function that I'm in.
One illustration of this might be a newspaper reporter or a wire service reporter writing a fat and flattering story about a public official and then taking a job with them.
Oh, sure. There's no question.
Which has happened numerous times.
It happens. We call this going over to the dark side, where I come from. However, there is a question here, and that is the legislature went ahead and passed an ethics law building on this kind of thing this year. A lot of legislators didn't like it. They thought it was demeaning. They thought that it really hurt the image of the legislature. It reinforced the stereotype of the legislator as sleazy. What do you think? You came from that house. Do you think that the ethics law was a good idea?
What percentage is sleaze?
I don't want to put you on the spot, of course.
No, Alan, you never put me on the spot. It's only the way you phrase your questions. I think what my honest opinion was that I think what happened this particular year is that the battle became over the title rather than the substance. And it appeared that if you were supportive of one piece and not a supportive of another piece, you were either more ethical or less ethical than the other individual. And when you superimpose that finger-pointing thing on an issue that was basically called ethics, and it really is disclosure and conflict of interest. It had nothing to do with ethics, because you could be around here another 250 years and you'll never be able to legislate ethics.
No, but you will be able to say some things are appropriate to do and some things are not.
Yes, but I think what happened, putting aside the substance of what was actually debated, but what happened is that it turned into a finger-pointing situation where the defense part of the legislative process and the governor's office, to a great extent, has said, listen, you know, if this is appropriate and that's not appropriate, therefore, we think it should be done, and you don't think it should be done.
Well, let's see.
One group becomes more ethical, so to speak, than the other, and I think it deteriorated to that point, and I think what got lost in the process was that the bill that was signed into law is, in fact, a very, very strong bill. It doesn't deal with ethics per se, it deals with disclosure, and it deals with conflict of interest. Now, keeping in mind that New York City has had some of the most strenuous disclosure and conflict of interest provisions on the law for years, but yet anyone who has read the newspapers in the last year sees that that provision or those provisions were obviously violated.
So your warning really is don't be fooled, if I can interpret what I think I'm hearing you say. No matter what you put into law, still leaves lots of room for unethical behavior on the part of individuals.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, well, that's because you always hear what you want to hear. The point that I'm trying to make is that you cannot put into law an airtight situation any more than you can put into law a tax law that a very bright, intelligent CPA can't find a way to either carve out a little niche.
So what do we do, give up?
No, you know, you'll live in what is called a democracy. Now, if you want to change the method by which you determine the life process in New York State, then we have to go away from a democracy, and then we find somebody in Albany who is the ultimate maker of law, who has defined...
Sounds like Mario Cuomo.
I didn't say it.
Alan, though, isn't this awful? We got a guy out there saying, wait a minute, we got to have laws to make sure our lawmakers aren't crumbs. And they're right now finding ways to get around this law.
Well, I thought that's what he said. Maybe.
Think?
Yeah, what is a person to think?
Why are only 40% of the people registering and 40% of that 40% voting? Could this be...
Well, I mean, that percentage of low public turnout for registration and voting occurred obviously before 1987. I think what you have, to a great extent, is a public that, for whatever reason, they decide that they don't want to be a part of the system.
Well,
I don't know what the ultimate answer is to that, other than the fact that it's a variety of public relations measures that have to be taken.
But Bill's point is that out there people are fairly disgusted with the political process, and that may be why they tune out. At least I think that's what...
Well, yeah, I would say they're upset. I don't think they're disgusted by it. I think we have also made, to a great extent, maybe it a little more difficult for them to express their views, and I think what you have is... well, there's a lot of it. I don't think there's any one thing, but for example, I think the public used to say that they could meet their politicians from time to time. Now I think what they're doing is they're getting up on Sunday morning at 8:30 and watching the three of us discuss public policy in New York State, when in fact they would rather go to a group meeting or have us go to them. You have lost the personal part of it.
Village Green is gone?
You've lost that part of it. And
but your constituents, the CEOs of these, when I get to talk to them, they don't like the legislature any more than the common man likes the legislature. They think that, I hear the same sort of stereotypical remarks from business leaders.
Well, you're obviously talking to a different group of business leaders than I talk to, because I don't hear that.
Maybe.
All right, we're out of time. We'll be back right after this. Our thanks to Daniel Walsh of the Public Policy Institute of the Business Council for joining us this morning on Capitol News Conference. And our thanks also to the incisive repartee of Dr. Alan Chartock, who, although he looks small between Walsh and Duffy, really isn't as small as he appears. It's a trick of Cine. And he'll be with us again next week, and so will Thomas Sobel, New York's new education commissioner, who's about to get an education himself, vis-a-vis Mario and Cuomo. Please join us then. I'm Bill Duffy. Good morning.